Hello again. Welcome back to Talk Economy, and thank you for being here. Today, we're going to take a step back and understand what's happening in Japan's economy and how it relates to the rest of the world. Not through panic or sensationalist headlines, but by looking at the long-term forces shaping it right now. Japan has been discussed as a slow economy for decades. So when headlines suddenly say something is breaking, it's easy to ignore them. But what's happening now isn't noise. It's a shift, not a collapse, but a turning point. Japan has faced economic pressure for a long time, which is why many people tune these stories out. But today, several long-term forces are lining up at the same time. That doesn't mean crisis. It means adjustment. And adjustments are worth understanding, especially when those adjustments affect more than one country. Japan isn't just another country. It's the world's fourth largest economy and one of the largest holders of US government debt. That means changes inside Japan don't stay inside Japan. Japan is deeply connected to global financial markets through trade, investment, and capital flows. So when conditions shift in Japan, they quietly influence interest rates, currencies, and markets elsewhere, even for people who never think about Japan directly. Japan affects other countries mainly through finance, trade, and currency markets. It's one of the largest international investors in the world, holding assets across the US, Europe, and emerging markets. When conditions inside Japan change, global investment flows can shift, not overnight, but gradually. And those shifts can influence interest rates, exchange rates, and asset prices in other economies. One of the core issues in Japan is debt. Japan carries one of the highest debt levels in the developed world. For years, this didn't cause stress because borrowing costs were near zero. Debt wasn't cheap. It was almost free. High debt by itself doesn't cause a crisis. What it does is limit flexibility. When borrowing is cheap, those limits don't feel urgent. When conditions change, they become much more visible. That environment is changing. Long-term Japanese bond yields are rising, something Japan hasn't seen in decades. Bond yields are essentially the long-term price of borrowing. When they rise, governments spend more just to maintain existing obligations. When rates rise, even slowly, debt becomes harder to manage. That doesn't force sudden cuts, but it does force caution. And caution shapes every other decision. At the same time, the Japanese yen has weakened sharply against the US dollar. This isn't a sudden accident. It's the result of different interest rate paths. Money flows toward higher returns. A weaker currency has mixed effects. It can help exporters, but it makes imports more expensive. Because Japan imports much of its energy and food, currency moves show up in everyday costs, quietly, rather than dramatically. Weaker yen also affects trade globally. Japanese exports become cheaper, which increases competition for manufacturers in other countries. That matters for places like Germany, South Korea, parts of the United States, and Mexico, where companies compete in the same global markets. Japan also faces a difficult policy balance. Raise rates too fast, and debt costs rise. Keep rates too low, and the currency weakens further. There's no clean solution, only trade-offs. Every option solves one problem while creating another. That's why policy changes tend to be gradual rather than sudden. Underneath everything is Japan's demographic reality. The population is shrinking and aging. That means fewer workers, slower growth, and more pressure on public finances. Demographics move slowly, but they're incredibly powerful. Fewer workers means less output and a smaller tax base over time. More retirees means higher long-term spending commitments. These aren't sudden shocks. They're slow pressures that shape economic decisions over decades. This does not mean Japan is collapsing. It remains wealthy, stable, and technologically advanced. But it does mean growth will be harder and choices will matter more. Japan is managing long-term pressure, not short-term panic. That distinction matters. Japan's situation also matters because it shows how advanced economies behave when growth slows, populations age, and debt remains high. Many countries are moving in that direction, just at different speeds. Japan isn't a warning to panic. It's a lesson in how long-term systems behave. Understanding that helps us see past headlines and think more clearly about the global economy.